I accused my housekeeper of stealing. Then I found her diary, under the couch. The afternoon sun, usually a warm embrace in my living room, felt like a judgment. Dust motes danced in its shafts, each one a tiny, accusatory spotlight. I paced the Persian rug, the plush fibers muffling my footsteps, but not the frantic thumping in my chest. It had been a week since the missing antique locket, a gaudy thing my grandmother had inexplicably cherished, vanished from its velvet-lined box on the mantelpiece. A week of sleepless nights, of turning over every cushion, of sifting through drawers with a growing unease that curdled into something sharp and ugly. My gaze, whenever it fell upon Elena, my housekeeper, was no longer casual. It was a probe, a silent interrogation. Elena, with her quiet efficiency, her perpetually downcast eyes, her worn hands that moved with a practiced grace. She'd been with me for 5 years, a silent fixture in the polished emptiness of my life, and in that week, she'd transformed in my mind from a hired hand into a suspect. The thought, once it took root, grew with alarming speed, nourished by my own insecurities and a lifetime of assuming the worst in people who had less than me. I'd convinced myself. The locket was irreplaceable, a tangible link to a past I clung to, and its disappearance was a violation, a theft that felt personal. My mind conjured scenarios, Elena pawning it, her quiet life masking a desperate need. Each imagined transgression fueled my conviction, hardening my heart against the years of her quiet service. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken accusation, a palpable tension that had begun to permeate every interaction. A curt nod replaced a polite greeting, a pointed sigh shadowed her every task. I saw her flinch once when I dropped a stack of mail near her, and I'd mistaken her startled reaction for guilt. I was so sure, so blindingly, self-righteously sure, that I was the victim here. The locket was a symbol, I told myself, of order and trust, and Elena had shattered it. The thought of confronting her, of the inevitable awkwardness, the potential for denial, had kept me from outright accusation, but my internal monologue was a torrent of judgment. I saw her now, across the room, dusting the piano with her usual meticulous care, her back to me, the silence stretched, filled only by the rhythmic swish of her cloth and the frantic drumming in my ears. I was a coiled spring, ready to snap, ready to unleash the accusation I'd rehearsed 100 times in the privacy of my own mind. The weight of my certainty pressed down, a heavy cloak that insulated me from any doubt. I was so consumed by my own sense of violation that I failed to see the subtle shifts in her demeanor, the way her shoulders seemed to carry a new burden, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands as she reached for a delicate figurine. My world had shrunk to the dimensions of that missing locket and the imagined thief, and in that constricted space, empathy had withered and died. The polished surfaces of my home reflected only my own distorted image, a picture of a grieved innocence that masked a far uglier truth. The confrontation, when it came, was a clumsy, brutal affair. I waited until she was finishing up, her coat already on, her worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The late afternoon light had softened, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the edges of the room, but my vision was sharp, focused on her face. I stood in the archway of the living room, my arms crossed, my posture radiating a cold, hard certainty. "Elena?" I began, my voice deliberately low, cutting through the quiet hum of the refrigerator. She turned. Her eyes, usually so placid, held a flicker of apprehension. "Yes, ma'am?" she replied, her voice barely a whisper. I took a step forward, the floorboards creaking a protest. "The locket," I stated, not a question, but an accusation. "My grandmother's locket. It's gone." I watched her closely, searching for any telltale sign, any flicker of guilt in her expression. Her brow furrowed, a genuine confusion clouding her features. "The locket," she repeated, her hand instinctively going to her chest. I haven't seen it." Her denial, so simple, so direct, should have been enough. But my mind, a well-oiled machine of suspicion, had already processed her 5 years of service through the lens of this single, imagined crime. I saw her hesitation, her wide eyes, not as innocence, but as practiced deception. "Don't lie to me, Elena," I said, my voice hardening, the carefully constructed calm shattering. "I know you took it." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, her face drained of color, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, And for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't fear, but a profound, soul-deep hurt. It was a look that pierced through my certainty, a tiny chink in the armor of my self-righteousness. But I pressed on, the momentum of my accusation too strong to halt. It was on the mantelpiece, and now it's gone, and you were the only one here. I gestured vaguely towards the empty space on the mantel, the absence of the locket a gaping wound in my reality. She finally found her voice, a shaky, broken sound. "Ma'am, I would never. I need to go." She turned abruptly, fumbling with the clasp of her bag, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. I watched her, a grim satisfaction mingling with a nascent, uncomfortable unease. I had spoken my truth, I had confronted the thief, and the world, in my mind, would be righted. But as she reached the door, her shoulders slumped, a single tear traced a path down her cheek, catching the fading light. She didn't look back. The click of the lock echoed in the sudden, profound silence, a sound that felt more like an ending than a resolution. The satisfaction I'd expected was replaced by a hollow ache, a gnawing emptiness that settled deep in my gut. The silence in the house, once a comfort, now felt vast and accusing. The following days were a blur of heightened anxiety and a gnawing emptiness that no amount of distraction could fill. The locket remained missing, a constant silent reminder of my accusation. My own home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every shadow seemed to harbor a secret, every creak of the floorboards a phantom footstep. I found myself replaying the scene with Elena, her stunned silence, the single tear that had escaped her eye. Each time, the memory pricked at my conscience, a tiny shard of ice in my gut. I dismissed it as the reaction of a guilty person caught in the act, but a sliver of doubt, unwelcome and persistent, had begun to worm its way into my thoughts. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before, the way Elena always meticulously straightened the cushions on the sofa, even the ones I rarely used, the quiet way she'd refill my water glass without being asked, her movements economical and unobtrusive, the faint scent of lavender that always clung to her, a scent I'd associated with her cleaning products. But now, in my troubled mind, it conjured a different image, a quiet, unassuming woman trying to create a semblance of order in her own life. My certainty began to fray at the edges. I found myself pacing the living room again, but this time, my movements were less aggressive, more aimless. My gaze drifted to the couch, the same couch where I'd sat in judgment, and my eyes fell upon something tucked deep beneath the edge of the worn fabric. It was a small, leather-bound book, its cover faded and soft with age. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't experienced in days, nudged me forward. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the leather. It was a diary. Elena's diary. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread and anticipation. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the book. This felt like a violation, an invasion of privacy, but the need to know, to understand, to perhaps even find a shred of justification for my harsh words, was overwhelming. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The pages were filled with a neat, almost delicate script, the ink a faded blue. It wasn't a chronicle of petty theft or desperate schemes. It was a testament to a life lived with quiet courage and profound love. She wrote of her ailing mother, of the mounting medical bills, of her dreams for her younger brother's education. She wrote of small joys, a particularly vibrant sunset, a child's laughter in the park, the comfort of a shared cup of tea. There were entries filled with her hopes, her fears, and her deep, unwavering faith. And then I found the entry that stopped my breath. Dated just a few days before the locket went missing, it spoke of a desperate decision, a painful sacrifice. Her mother's condition had worsened. A new, expensive medication was needed immediately, and Elena, with a heavy heart, had decided to sell a small treasured heirloom, a delicate silver bracelet, a gift from her own grandmother, to cover the cost. There was no mention of my locket, no hint of any wrongdoing. The words swam before my eyes, blurring with unshed tears. My accusation, my certainty, my judgment, it all dissolved into a sickening wave of shame. I saw Elena not as a thief, but as a woman grappling with impossible choices, a woman who carried the weight of her family's well-being on her slender shoulders. The locket, I realized with a crushing certainty, had likely been misplaced, fallen behind a piece of furniture, or perhaps even knocked off by a stray draft. It was an accident, a mundane oversight, but my own internal narrative had twisted it into a crime. The weight of my mistake pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. The diary lay open in my hands, its pages a stark testament to my failure of empathy, my quickness to judge. I saw Elena's quiet dignity, her resilience in the face of hardship, and contrasted it with my own petty suspicions and unfounded accusations. The polished surfaces of my home now seemed to mock me, reflecting back an image of a person I no longer recognized, a person capable of such casual cruelty. I closed the diary, the soft thud of the cover a final punctuation mark on my self-inflicted shame. The locket was still missing, a small detail that now seemed utterly insignificant compared to the profound damage I had inflicted on another human being. I didn't know if I would ever find it, and in that moment, I didn't care. What mattered was Elena, her quiet strength, her unspoken burdens, and my own gaping blind spot. I had seen a reflection of myself in her struggles, a reflection I had desperately tried to ignore, and in my fear and insecurity, I had lashed out. The sun had set, and a soft twilight had settled over the room, painting everything in muted hues of gray and lavender. The scent of lavender, once a simple reminder of Elena's presence, now carried the weight of my regret. I stood there for a long time, the diary clutched in my hand, the silence of the house amplifying the clamor of my own conscience. I had accused her of stealing, of violating the trust I had placed in her, and in doing so, I had stolen something far more valuable from myself, my own capacity for compassion. The realization was a bitter pill, but within it, a fragile seed of understanding began to sprout. My world had been built on a foundation of assumptions, of looking for the worst in others, and in that, I had become blind to the quiet nobility that often exists in the spaces we overlook. The path ahead was unclear, shrouded in the twilight of my own making, but for the first time, I felt a genuine desire to find it, to seek out the truth not in suspicion, but in understanding. The next morning, the air felt different. The sun, when it finally broke through the clouds, seemed to carry a gentler light. I found Elena at the bus stop, her usual spot, her shoulders stooped against the morning chill. My heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was a desperate hope, a fragile plea for a chance to mend what I had broken. I walked towards her, my steps slow and deliberate, the worn diary tucked inside my coat. Her eyes, when she saw me, widened with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. I stopped a few feet away, the distance between us a chasm I had created. I held out the diary, my hand trembling slightly. "Elena," I began, my voice rough with emotion. I owe you an apology. A profound apology." I saw her confusion, her wariness, and I pressed on, my gaze fixed on hers. "I read your diary, and I am so sorry. I was wrong, terribly wrong." The words, once spoken, felt like a release, a heavy weight lifting from my chest. Her expression shifted, the apprehension softening into a cautious curiosity. I continued, the dam of my regret finally breaking. "I accused you of stealing, of betraying my trust, and all along you were carrying burdens I couldn't even imagine. You were demonstrating a strength, a resilience, that I was completely blind to." I gestured to the diary. This showed me. It showed me who you truly are, and it showed me who I failed to be. I looked down at my hands, the shame still a potent force, but now mingled with a quiet determination. "The locket," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I think it must have fallen. I haven't found it, but it doesn't matter. What matters is what I did, what I said, and I can never truly make up for that, but I had to try." I looked up, meeting her gaze, my eyes searching hers for any sign of forgiveness, any flicker of understanding. Her lips parted, and for a moment, I thought she might speak, but she simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. The bus rumbled to a stop, its brakes hissing. She hesitated for a moment, then, with a quiet grace that I now recognized as her own unique strength, she reached out and gently took the diary from my hand. Her fingers brushed mine, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through me. She offered a small, almost imperceptible smile, a fragile bloom in the harsh landscape of my regret. Then, she turned and boarded the bus, disappearing into the crowded interior. I stood there, watching the bus pull away, the morning air still carrying the faint scent of lavender. The locket remained lost, a symbol of my past blindness, but something else had been found, a sliver of understanding, a profound ache of regret, and the quiet, humbling realization of my own fallibility. The quiet hum of the dishwasher felt like a lullaby. The locket was still gone, a ghost in the polished rooms, but its absence no longer consumed me. Instead, a different kind of presence filled the house, a quiet, lingering awareness of the unseen struggles, the quiet triumphs, the deep wells of resilience that exist beneath the surface of everyday lives. My own world, once so rigidly defined by my own perceptions, had expanded, the edges softened by a newfound empathy. The memory of Elena's face, of her quiet dignity in the face of my baseless accusation, was a constant, gentle reminder. It wasn't a scar, but a compass, guiding me toward a more compassionate way of seeing. The world is a tapestry woven with threads unseen, and each soul carries a story, a silent, vibrant sheen. The weight of that morning, standing at the bus stop, lingered. It wasn't just the apology or the recovery of the diary, but the stark realization of how easily a narrative can be constructed, how swiftly we can become the architects of another's perceived downfall based on scant evidence and an abundance of our own assumptions. Now consider how this applies when you encounter someone whose life circumstances differ wildly from your own. My initial judgment of Elena was born from a place of privilege, a comfortable isolation that allowed me to view her situation through a distorted lens of suspicion rather than empathy. It was the absence of understanding her lived reality, the sheer unfamiliarity with the pressures that might compel someone to desperate measures that fueled my swift condemnation. Building on this, however, the true shift wasn't in Elena's actions, but in my internal recalibration. The diary served not as a confession, but as a mirror reflecting my own character flaws. It revealed my tendency to project my own insecurities onto others, to assume malice where there was simply struggle. This internal recalibration is paramount. It's not about finding external validation for your newfound understanding, but about the quiet, often uncomfortable process of self-examination. The moments that truly test our ethical awakening aren't the grand gestures, but the subtle, everyday interactions where the impulse to judge arises. Furthermore, the recovery of the diary didn't magically erase the harm done. The lingering scent of regret, the echo of my harsh words, served as a constant, albeit painful reminder. This is where genuine redemption begins, not in seeking absolution, but in accepting the consequences of our actions and committing to a different path. It's about understanding that the impact of our words and deeds often extends far beyond our immediate intentions, creating ripples that can persist long after we've moved on. The process demands an unwavering commitment to observing, to listening, and to suspending judgment, even when the temptation to categorize and condemn feels overwhelming. The quiet nod Elena gave me at the bus stop, the almost imperceptible smile, was not an immediate forgiveness, but an acknowledgement. It was an opening, a fragile bridge built across the chasm of my transgression. This subtle shift in interaction underscores a crucial point. Ethical growth is often a gradual process, marked by small, incremental changes rather than dramatic transformations. It requires patience, not just with others, but with oneself, as we navigate the complexities of human connection and strive to embody the values we claim to hold. The journey is less about achieving a state of perfect ethical purity and more about the continuous, conscious effort to act with greater kindness and understanding, even when it's difficult. The initial shock of my misjudgment slowly receded, leaving a raw, exposed landscape of regret. I found myself observing people differently, not with suspicion, but with a quiet curiosity that bordered on apprehension. A harsh word from a stranger in traffic, a curt dismissal from a colleague, these small moments, previously ignored or met with my own dismissive retort, now felt amplified, echoing the injustice I had inflicted on Elena. I began to notice the subtle ways people carried their burdens, the almost imperceptible flinches, the guarded expressions that hinted at unseen struggles. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a world far more complex and fragile than my previous worldview had allowed. The ease with which I had once judged, the certainty I had felt in my own righteousness, now felt like a dangerous delusion, a shield I had worn that had ultimately blinded me. Furthermore, this newfound awareness extended beyond interpersonal interactions into my perception of broader societal dynamics. I started to question the narratives I had passively absorbed, the ingrained biases that shaped my understanding of success and failure, of worth and worthlessness. The casual pronouncements about hard work and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps that I had once readily accepted now seemed simplistic, even cruel, when viewed through the lens of individuals facing systemic disadvantages or unforeseen personal crises. I began to see how easily a single misstep, a single stroke of bad luck, could derail a life, and how the judgments of others, often rooted in their own privileged vantage point, could further entrench that downward spiral. Conversely, the experience with Elena also illuminated the profound courage required to extend grace, both to others and to oneself. My immediate instinct after realizing my error wasn't to seek immediate absolution, but to retreat into self-recrimination. The weight of shame was immense, and the thought of facing Elena, of articulating the depth of my remorse, felt like an insurmountable hurdle. This internal conflict highlighted a critical aspect of ethical growth, the struggle to move beyond the paralyzing grip of guilt and towards active, albeit imperfect, atonement. It's in these moments of profound self-doubt that the true test of character lies, not in the absence of error, but in the willingness to confront it and strive for amends. Another crucial layer to this developing understanding is the realization that empathy is not a static state, but an ongoing practice. It requires constant vigilance, a deliberate effort to question assumptions, and to actively seek out perspectives that challenge our own. The initial shock of my mistake had granted me a temporary heightened awareness, but I understood that this sensitivity could easily dull with time, allowing the old habits of judgment to creep back in. Therefore, the commitment to this ethical awakening must be sustained, woven into the fabric of daily life, rather than treated as a singular, transformative event. It means actively engaging with narratives that differ from my own, seeking out stories of struggle and resilience that might otherwise remain invisible. Consequently, this continuous practice demands a certain vulnerability. To truly understand another's experience, one must be willing to acknowledge the limits of one's own knowledge and perspective. It means being open to being wrong, to having one's preconceived notions dismantled, and to embracing the discomfort that often accompanies such profound self-discovery. The ease with which I had once judged Elena stemmed, in part, from a refusal to acknowledge my own potential for error, a subtle arrogance that insulated me from the messy complexities of human existence. Now, I understood that true ethical growth requires shedding that protective, yet ultimately isolating shell. The initial shock of my misjudgment slowly receded, leaving a raw, exposed landscape of regret. I found myself observing people differently, not with suspicion, but with a quiet curiosity that bordered on apprehension. A harsh word from a stranger in traffic, a curt dismissal from a colleague, these small moments, previously ignored or met with my own dismissive retort, now felt amplified, echoing the injustice I had inflicted on Elena. I began to notice the subtle ways people carried their burdens, the almost imperceptible flinches, the guarded expressions that hinted at unseen struggles. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a world far more complex and fragile than my previous worldview had allowed. The ease with which I had once judged, the certainty I had felt in my own righteousness, now felt like a dangerous delusion, a shield I had worn that had ultimately blinded me. Building on this newfound sensitivity, I started to actively seek out narratives that diverged from my own comfortable experience. Instead of passively consuming media that reinforced my existing worldview, I deliberately engaged with stories that showcased hardship, resilience, and the quiet dignity of individuals navigating systemic obstacles. This wasn't about pity. It was about a conscious effort to expand my understanding of human experience beyond the confines of my own privileged perspective. I found myself drawn to documentaries detailing the lives of refugees, reading memoirs of those who had overcome profound personal tragedy, and listening more intently to the experiences of people from vastly different socioeconomic backgrounds. Each story, each encounter, served as a subtle recalibration, chipping away at the ingrained assumptions that had once dictated my snap judgments. Furthermore, this active engagement with diverse perspectives revealed a critical insight: the seductive nature of simplistic judgments. It is far easier to categorize individuals, to assign them labels based on superficial observations or ingrained societal biases, than it is to grapple with the multifaceted realities of their lives. My accusation of Elena was a prime example of this cognitive shortcut. It was the simplest explanation for a perceived transgression, requiring no deeper inquiry or emotional investment. Now I understood that true ethical growth demands the arduous but necessary work of resisting these easy categorizations, of digging beneath the surface to uncover the complex interplay of factors that shape human behavior. Conversely, the journey toward greater empathy also necessitated a reckoning with my own internal biases. It wasn't enough to simply observe the struggles of others. I had to confront the ways in which my own upbringing, my education, and my social circles had inadvertently shaped my worldview, creating blind spots I had been unaware of. This introspective work was often uncomfortable, revealing prejudices I hadn't realized I possessed, and challenging deeply held beliefs that I had never questioned. It was akin to cleaning out a cluttered attic, sifting through old assumptions and discarding those that no longer served a truthful purpose, making space for new, more compassionate understandings. Another crucial layer to this developing understanding is the realization that empathy is not a static state, but an ongoing practice. It requires constant vigilance, a deliberate effort to question assumptions and to actively seek out perspectives that challenge our own. The initial shock of my mistake had granted me a temporary heightened awareness, but I understood that this sensitivity could easily dull with time, allowing the old habits of judgment to creep back in. Therefore, the commitment to this ethical awakening must be sustained, woven into the fabric of daily life, rather than treated as a singular, transformative event. It means actively engaging with narratives that differ from my own, seeking out stories of struggle and resilience that might otherwise remain invisible. Consequently, this continuous practice demands a certain vulnerability. To truly understand another's experience, one must be willing to acknowledge the limits of one's own knowledge and perspective. It means being open to being wrong, to having one's preconceived notions dismantled, and to embracing the discomfort that often accompanies such profound self-discovery. The ease with which I had once judged Elena stemmed, in part, from a refusal to acknowledge my own potential for error, a subtle arrogance that insulated me from the messy complexities of human existence. Now I understood that true ethical growth requires shedding that protective yet ultimately isolating shell. As the echoes of past certainties begin to fade, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of human fallibility, a subtle recalibration occurs within the observer. The sharp edges of judgment, once so readily applied, soften, yielding to a landscape where shades of gray replace stark black and white. This shift isn't merely intellectual, it's a visceral reorientation, a fundamental alteration in how the world is perceived. The intricate web of interconnected experiences, once viewed as separate incidents, now reveals its underlying patterns, demonstrating how individual actions, however seemingly small, ripple outwards, impacting not only others, but also shaping the very fabric of our own internal world. Conceptualizing this convergence, consider a vast, intricate mosaic. Each piece, initially perceived in isolation, gains its true significance only when viewed in relation to its neighbors. The hues that seemed discordant on their own begin to harmonize, forming a cohesive, breathtaking image. Similarly, the moments of revelation and introspection, the wrestling with ingrained biases, and the dawning awareness of unseen struggles, all contribute to a larger, more profound understanding. These elements, when brought together, no longer stand as discrete events, but as integral components of a developing ethical consciousness, each adding depth and dimension to the emerging picture of personal growth. In light of these insights, the path forward, though not yet fully illuminated, becomes discernibly clearer. The initial catalyst, the moment of profound misjudgment, has served its purpose not as an endpoint, but as a crucial pivot. It has initiated a process of continuous self-examination, encouraging a sustained effort to move beyond superficial assessments and to engage with the world through a lens of greater compassion and humility. This ongoing journey requires a conscious commitment to challenging one's own assumptions, to actively seeking out diverse perspectives, and to embracing the vulnerability that accompanies genuine learning. Reflecting on this journey so far, one can observe a fundamental transformation in the internal compass. The previously relied upon markers of certainty have been replaced by a more fluid, responsive system, one that prioritizes understanding over immediate judgment. This evolution is not about arriving at a perfect state of ethical enlightenment, but about cultivating a persistent, mindful engagement with the complexities of human interaction. It is about recognizing that growth is an ongoing process, a continuous endeavor to refine our perceptions and to act with greater intention and kindness, even when the path is fraught with uncertainty. As we pivot towards the final reflection, the cumulative effect of these experiences points towards a deeper, more integrated understanding of our place within the human tapestry. The quiet hum of the dishwasher felt like a lullaby. The locket was still gone, a ghost in the polished rooms, but its absence no longer consumed me. Instead, a different kind of presence filled the house. A quiet, lingering awareness of the unseen struggles, the quiet triumphs, the deep wells of resilience that exist beneath the surface of everyday lives. My own world, once so rigidly defined by my own perceptions, had expanded, the edges softened by a newfound empathy. The memory of Elena's face, of her quiet dignity in the face of my baseless accusation, was a constant, gentle reminder. It wasn't a scar, but a compass, guiding me toward a more compassionate way of seeing. The initial shock of my misjudgment slowly receded, leaving a raw, exposed landscape of regret. I found myself observing people differently, not with suspicion, but with a quiet curiosity that bordered on apprehension. A harsh word from a stranger in traffic, a curt dismissal from a colleague, these small moments, previously ignored or met with my own dismissive retort, now felt amplified, echoing the injustice I had inflicted on Elena. I began to notice the subtle ways people carried their burdens, the almost imperceptible flinches, the guarded expressions that hinted at unseen struggles. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a world far more complex and fragile than my previous worldview had allowed. The ease with which I had once judged, the certainty I had felt in my own righteousness, now felt like a dangerous delusion, a shield I had worn that had ultimately blinded me. Reflecting on this journey so far, one can observe a fundamental transformation in the internal compass. The previously relied upon markers of certainty have been replaced by a more fluid, responsive system, one that prioritizes understanding over immediate judgment. This evolution is not about arriving at a perfect state of ethical enlightenment, but about cultivating a persistent, mindful engagement with the complexities of human interaction. It is about recognizing that growth is an ongoing process, a continuous endeavor to refine our perceptions and to act with greater intention and kindness, even when the path is fraught with uncertainty. The true practice begins now. The world is a tapestry woven with threads unseen, and each soul carries a story, a silent, vibrant